welcome back to Gameable Audio, your VGM podcast out there on the internet. I am your host, Christofer Schenström, and this is episode 59. And this week, we are having yet another special. That means we have a guest. So everybody say welcome to Nathan Ross. Hello.
Hello there. How you doing?
I am amazing. I feel like it's been raining and everything, but just about when we started talking now, the sun just came out, so that must be a sign, right?
Yeah, it's been sunny here in California, so yay summer.
Yay summer indeed. No, but it is so much fun to have you here to talk a little bit about the subject that we're going to talk about. I just don't want to spoil it, like, entirely if people are not reading in on the names of episodes here, but this game that we're going to talk about is a little bit special to me. First and foremost, it is a dear friend of mine who has been working on this game for such a long time. And from what I understand, you have been connected with this person previously as well, as you've been working on a previous game of his.
Yep.
So it's definitely going to be just super exciting to just pick your mind a little bit about the game itself, your processes and so on, and how it is to actually get back on the horse and work with somebody again. But before we dive into those parts, we're definitely, as always, going to go on the real interesting questions. Where you kind of started out with the processes of making music? Like, what's your origin story, Nate?
My goodness. So I've been musically active probably since I was about 15. So that was 25 years ago. And when I first started to have this sort of natural desire to like tap on my desk, and my mom wouldn't like allow me to have like an actual drum set, but I really wanted to learn the drums. So it started there, just kind of being rhythmically, just, you know, messing around with patterns, messing around with timbres of like different instruments, you know, getting a crumpled piece of paper to use as like a hi-hat, you know, things like that. I really explored that. And a few years after I was in high school and I was kind of going through a lot. I was picked on, and there was a lot that I wanted to share with the world. And so I kind of turned towards the lyricism aspect. And so I started making hip hop music back when I graduated in around 2003, 2004. And, I stuck with that, doing my own DIY hip-hop productions for about 10 years. And during that, I also had the opportunity to join a reggae, rock, funk kind of ska fusion band as their singer. And that was really, really fun. An amazing experience because I really love all those genres too. I love all genres of music. But the band ended up splitting in like 2015, and during all of this, I had still been playing video games, but I never considered the idea of doing video game music.
Yeah.
After the band breakup, I was kind of lost a little bit. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. It was really heartbreaking because I loved doing that.
Yeah.
And then one day I was like a dishwasher at this grocery store, and I had a playlist. And then while I was cleaning, like I was kind of adding things to this playlist, I was also going through my CD case back at home, and I came across Sonic Adventure 2 soundtrack, and I said, "Oh my God, light bulb moment." And Sonic Adventure 2 is probably one of my favorite video games of all time, favorite soundtracks of all time, and it really made me realize, like, hey, I can still continue making music, but there's an industry for this. And so then I went to audio school in San Francisco, a place called Purring Studios, and I went to school from 2016 until about 2018, did some custom classes, and I started joining, little projects here and there up until about 2019 when I joined Twitch, and that's where I met Kev Andersson. And then when COVID hit, I was out of the job, and it was the perfect time for me to start really diving into finding people that wanted me on their projects. And so, and now 5 years later, here we are. So,
from what I understand, you have been working on a couple of projects, video game related. It's not just the previous game that Kevin worked on and the current game that he has been working on. I saw some other titles that felt very gamey, so I just need to just dive down and look into these things as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So another friend of mine that I met on Twitch, he goes by the name White Vault, and he made a video game called The Adventures of the Carrot Captain. It had a very adventure time just vibe and energy, but it was pixel art, and so I made a lot of chiptune music for him. I think I made, I don't know, 20 to 25 songs for that. I also made orchestral music for a turn-based strategy card game for my friend Mercenary Mage, and it was a game called Unyielding. And so I kind of dove into the orchestral side of things, but I would probably say like my absolute favorite is working in cartoon and chiptune. Okay. But I've done a few other commissions for people for their stream intros, making little like hip hop beats and things like that. But yeah, I've kind of done it all. I really enjoy. I'm really passionate about exploring all the different genres of music. But yeah,
but it's so interesting that you ended up in a certain way where when you wanted to like explore the most, you had, I would kind of say, the best kind of situation going on for you. Due to the fact that we had COVID, everybody was at home. Like everybody was on Twitch streaming and doing everything. So you already had this like smorgasbord of people to just dive into and see what they were doing. But since you were talking about Twitch as well, were you like specifically just diving into streams where they were making games, or were you just generally interested in just checking around on Twitch?
Yeah, so after the band breakup, I had my one sort of what am I gonna do next? And after I had graduated and was looking for other projects, I had just gotten out of a very manipulative project, and I was a little bit lost too. And I was like, I can't find any work. I went to Reddit, went to LinkedIn, went everywhere, and I just could not find work for the life of me. So I went to Twitch after. He's a YouTuber that goes by the name of Tim Ruswick, and he does a lot of indie videos on YouTube. I don't know if I've done them in a while, but that's where I got really motivated to start like considering making my own game, or really diving into like the Twitch sphere. And that's kind of where it all started. And then I started out just kind of visiting artists doing like pixel art or traditional art. Maybe they needed music for their YouTube channel or whatever. And then I started to learn that there's just an entire community of devs out there. I mean, so many devs just working on their projects on stream. And I said, okay, I need to shoot my shot. And we'll talk about Kev Andersson specifically. He was working on the very first prototype, which was like a penguin prototype. I don't know if you've seen that, but it was like basically some of the levels that are in there, the nugget levels, it was that same mechanics. Anyway, I had given him a song to kind of test and see if he liked it, and he told me immediately that he had like cried because it was like exactly what he wanted. And I was like, okay, so do you and at this time I didn't know what his budget was. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that I wanted to join a game and be a help, and the rest is history. So
that is amazing. So when you're sending around these like samples and so on music, do you usually try to customize them to the experience that the customer would try to sell while they're working on their product and so on, or do you just have a general like a soundscape sample that you send to people when you feel like, hey, I want to send my samples to this developer?
It's interesting because you can a little bit of both. Sometimes what I'll do is find ref tracks and say, hey, I'm kind of leaning towards a little bit of this from Yoshi's Crafted World, but then a little bit of this from Short Hike, whatever. But in the end, being able to produce like a sample within an hour time can be the most beneficial, because the game that they're working on, it's unique, right? It has its own things. It borrows from other inspirations, and it's my job to make sure that I am pulling from reference tracks, but making it its own thing. So when I sent Kev a sample, I spent like an hour using just cozy instruments and things like that, and it ended up working well. So
that is awesome as well. I kind of like the intuition that you have, that when you're doing something that it feels like you're going more on your own tangent and say this is what I believe would be fitting for the situation or for this game. Because one thing that I've noticed that people do talk about sometimes, especially when I'm looking at composers, is usually like if somebody employs you, it's like, hey, I would like for you to make the music, and then they micromanage that person all the time, and it kind of alienates the composer itself. Like, why did you employ me if you're just gonna kind of do everything yourself? You're not making me do the work.
Yep.
So I find it so interesting that some people are really just going down for straight on references and so on, while others are more organic. We talked a little bit off before. We talked more about being organic and how we would like to talk with each other being more organic. But it feels like you really like coexist together with the organic lifestyle in a sense.
I think there's a mutual trust. Obviously, it's important when I'm making, samples for a client to make sure that I'm going down a few different rabbit holes. If I think of it like cooking, right? Like if I'm not sure if the game needs to be more cozy than wacky or more chiptune than cartoon, I'll kind of switch up the ratios. You know what I mean? I might have some very few and far between cartoon wacky things around a cozy atmosphere, or I might swap it and make it really, really wacky, and then have some cuteness kind of thrown in there, if that makes any sense. And so sometimes being able to provide those different sort of ratios can help determine. And with Kevin and other clients, they're not they might not be entirely sure of what they're looking for. So it's kind of up to us to kind of use our intuition as well, and that mutual trust that we're talking about. So yeah.
So when it comes to making music and so on for different projects and so on, since you've been doing a couple of projects, you have some sort of sense right now on kind of what to expect and so on. And going into Twitch and trying to find people and their projects through that way, I guess there's a little bit of a special situation going on, because usually you might have something playable already in a sense. You don't have too much concept art maybe. Like, how do you usually try to find this kind of red thread for a soundtrack if needed to?
No, you're totally correct. You get to see the process. You get to kind of see what their interests are. The greatest thing about finding, people on Twitch is you get to see them face to face. You get to meet them in person. You don't know who you're meeting when you send messages to clients. It's all text. You don't know much of anything. So it's so much more personable, but also it's so much easier for you to kind of pick up on what they're working on. And, games change, and, concepts get thrown out, or, like art styles sometimes change. So you have to be prepared for that. But, it was like when I saw what Kevin was working on in his like earlier prototypes for all that, it was really easy for me to at least give him something that worked well enough, right? Whether or not it was going to evolve into something different. So
that is all very correct, I would say. No, but one thing that kind of pops up in my mind is usually when you find somebody that is developing some sort of game, an artist or maybe a developer itself, like how long do you usually look at their stream before you actually pop the question, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't remember. For me, I always found it much better to sort of just get to know them as a person and as a friend, so that they can gain your trust from just the loyalty of just hanging out and showing up. And also, like, it gives you more of a chance to sort of digest it all, right? I usually wouldn't just show up and say, okay, I'm going to make you a sample in an hour and just shoot it their way. No, like what I want to do is hang out with you, get to know your project, get to know like what your favorite games are. Little things like that can help really dictate how you make things.
So in this case, since we're going to focus more around Kevin in this case, the first time you actually got to know him was not for the PaperKlay project. It was for Hoplegs.
For Hoplegs, yeah.
Yeah. So what was your first interaction there, if we just can get a little bit of an origin story there?
Yeah, so before Hoplegs was the earlier prototype of what is now PaperKlay, or what is now the Nugget levels of PaperKlay. It was a penguin game, and he was working on it, and that was the very first sample that I ever sent him. But then I forget exactly what happened, but I think he took a break from that, just sort of like let it do its own thing and work on a different prototype for fun. And this prototype ended up becoming Hoplegs, and it was like, a really wacky game where you use all of the buttons on your keypad to try, like, as different legs. And anyway, he was messing around with this. It started to gain some traction, and he said, all right, I think I'm going to switch to this. And he said, do you still want to be on this project? And I said, yes, absolutely. So that started in, oh my gosh, how long ago? Was this 2020? Yeah.
I think it was something like that, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Because he's been working on PaperKlay, if I remember correctly, it's like 3 or 4 years at least. So yeah, something like that. And he did I think it was like Dumb Ideas Club Tuesdays or something like that. Or it was Thursdays.
The DIC.
Yeah, it is amazing. I love that. And it was so many times I was just hanging out in the chat, and he was like, hey, what about if this happens?
I love Kevin. He's like a very focused person. Like, he's really like knows what he's doing, but he also knows how to have fun. Like, I just love that concept of Dumb Ideas Club. It's so funny. Definitely.
I mean, I've been connected with Kevin for about, it's almost like 10 years now, I think. Because the first time I got in contact with him was actually to send in my application to the same school he was already at. And the teachers themselves, when I tried to mail them, they did not really answer. So I actually just like, hey, let's see if I can just reach out to any student there. And Kevin was actually the one to be the first one to actually reply to me.
That's great.
And he was also a level designer at that point in time. And I was interested in becoming a level designer in this school as well. So he kind of became my senpai in a sense.
I love it.
So he helped me out to get into school and so on, give some feedback on my portfolio that I use for applications and so on. So I definitely fully understand everything kind of going around. And when you're saying that he's a gentle and a sweet guy and knows humor, I definitely know where you're coming from as well.
Very sweet guy. That is funny. Notice me, senpai.
Exactly. Kevin, you're listening to this, I hope. No. But considering that you did music already for the Nugget level, or what became the Nugget levels in the end, I'm betting that Kevin already had you in mind when you moved from Hoplegs, and he jumped back later to what became PaperKlay.
Yes.
So was this something already from the beginning that he was keeping you in the loop for like new biomes and levels and so on?
Yeah. So, I told him absolutely, it is no hard feelings if you want to look for other composers to do things. Like, I want to make sure that I'm the right fit for every project, with no room for me to even explain further. He said, no, like, I want you on this project. So I was really grateful when he reached back out to say that. I think there's a mutual trust that we've built with each other, that we're gonna make, like, sometimes you're always the right fit because you have the humility to know when it's not working out, but it feels like it's already been working out with his brand and stuff. If you turn to a completely different genre, I would feel comfortable being able to say, hey, I can make that work for you. So
great. But now that we're so focused on Kevin and that we're starting to already poke at PaperKlay, I think it's time for us to dive into the first track of this week, as we also talked a little bit about your origin story and where you come from, at least. So for people that do not know about PaperKlay, PaperKlay is a classic 3D platformer, much like the collectathon games such as Super Mario 64, but with a twist. It both unfolds and kind of rotates as you adventure your way through this world of crafting materials such as clay, paper, and cardboard. And it is just absolutely adorable. And the game was developed by Kevin Andersson and under the name of YKev, which is kind of the company-wise. And the game is released on Steam from the 27th of May 2025. So with that said, let's dive into the first track of the week, which was selected by you, Nathan. And it is the track named Frog Cove. Fading Out Frog Cove. So, for everybody who's new to the podcast, listening for the first time, etc., for every track that we're listening to, I have this section or segment called Emotion. It is basically me leaning forward in my chair, putting my headphones on, and I isolate myself and my senses only to listen to the track itself. And I will keep listening to that freaking track until I get some sort of emotion. And it could be literally anything, as people might know from this segment who have listened to the show before. But let's dive into my emotion for Frog Cove. Easy and get going track. It feels like a serene opening track, like something you would hear while running on a field playfully, like in a movie. But I would almost deem this track like a laid-back Zelda track, to be honest. Like the Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time, if there were no enemies there. The track is playful. The tunes I like the most in this is, I guess there's some sort of ukulele here, but there's also a xylophone, and they're playing against each other. And I really adore this part with this track. So what do you feel about this, Nate?
Well, I pulled inspiration, obviously, from a lot of different aspects. One in particular, it was like a very early reference track, was actually, I think it was called Boat Buddies from A Short Hike. Mm-hmm. And okay. I was really borrowing inspiration from the kind of rhythmic pattern and also the use of like playing the third in the major scale. For those who don't know, it just like, you know, it's the third note when you play like all of the white keys for the C. Anyway, and that it created that emotion that I was looking for, that where it resided in, you know, not the home note is what they call it. Okay. But it kind of resided in the third. But I obviously wanted to make it its own thing. I definitely don't want to do any type of plagiarization. And so I kind of just let it flow with a more offbeat. I tend to use a lot of offbeats in my music where instead of playing things necessarily on the one, I'll play it on the ands. So the one and two and I love doing that. It's one of my signature sort of things that I enjoy doing, which is adding a lot of like fun rhythmic patterns. Anyway, so I borrowed from Short Hike, Yoshi's Crafted World, Banjo-Kazooie, and many, many more. Timbre-wise, I would say that it was leaning towards the aesthetic of A Short Hike, but with the instrument choices of like Yoshi's Crafted World or Woolly World. So
that is really nice. I for one really loved and adored The Short Hike, and to me the music in that game felt more like a ambience to the kind of vacation you're having in that game, because you can literally go and do anything in that game, and I found it so cozy. And just like the name of A Short Hike, the game was short as well, short and sweet.
One other thing I wanted to add is that, you know, it was definitely my intention to make something that was very positive, but also gets you wanting to like get up and walk around. You know, there's a lot of cozy songs that are more laid back, as if you were sitting in a chair and relaxing. But this one, I wanted to make sure it immediately made the player want to go out and explore. So.
So how did you feel when you hear my emotion here of making a reference to Zelda then?
It's an honor, honestly. Zelda music clearly is a huge inspiration for me as well. Although I don't really think about making Zelda-esque music for this project. It kind of comes out of me naturally, so it makes a lot of sense now that you're saying it. So,
did you play a lot of Zelda back in the day then?
Ocarina of Time was definitely one of my favorites. I've played way too many hours on Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Way too many side quests. I'm the side quest guy. But I love Zelda, and I'll be for the first time playing Twilight Princess here in the near future. I'm so excited to play it. I have not played it yet, but
it is
I have
so
listened
good.
to the soundtrack. So
let's just say this at least. Just push through. That's the only thing I'm gonna say.
Just push through.
Just push through. Because, for me, that is one of the best Zelda games for me at the moment as well. But it needs a little bit pushing.
No, totally understandable.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil anything, so that's all I'm saying. No, but considering also, I was a little bit unsure. You have some sort of string instrument in this track as well, and for me, it felt like a ukulele, but I don't know for sure. So I just need to verify. Was it a ukulele that I heard in this?
So, do you mean like towards the end of the loop where it goes ba-da-da-da-da-da? That is actually a banjo. So I'm using a mix. So layer-wise, I'm using banjo. I'm using acoustic guitar, like acoustic strumming, but also runs with the acoustic guitar. Sometimes I layer both the banjo and the acoustic guitar, and other times I do a call and response between the two. But we've got marimbas, we have accordion in there. And then we have like some bongos or congas. I forget which one it was. And we also, which I use in a lot of the tracks, I use, I actually play a rhythm pattern on my lap and I record it to kind of give it sort of a sort of DIY crafty sort of, thing. So those are a lot of the layers. I might be missing one because a lot of my songs have a lot of layers. So
I like that. But considering that you're working with layers and so many different kind of instruments, a lot of these instruments can theoretically be connected to, I would say, the more like tropical kind of style. But the track itself didn't feel too tropical. Like, how do you feel that for me, who is just listening in on this and don't really have any musical background, I starting to understand all this kind of instrument that can be used or is more common in tropical areas, but you're not capturing that. You actually have this kind of more playful, easygoing kind of track that just feels relaxing to some extent.
Yeah, so it might be the way that I play, like the offbeats. A lot of tropical music will have like just tons of rhythm patterns and it's very playful with the rhythm section. So that could be what you're feeling. I know in some of the songs in the soundtrack, you will definitely be hearing a lot more tribal drumming going on. One song in particular, or a couple in particular, have a lot of tribal drumming in there. So, but for this one specifically, I think what you probably are picking out is the way that it's being played and not the instruments themselves.
Could definitely be that. Of course, like you're saying, could be something with the offbeat as well that kind of adjusts a little bit. It's not making a change, it's just adjusting it a little bit. And that's kind of what I'm picking up on. That could definitely be it.
Totally.
And looking through this is the first track that we listened to this week, but we're going to listen to 4 more, and we're not going to the next straight away. I just want to, since you were starting to work on tracks for the Nugget part, which wasn't Nugget in the beginning. It's like when you started working on actively knowing this was for PaperKlay, like did you utilize any of the tracks that you previously made for the Penguin game, or did you just start over?
So this is an interesting question. So early on, for those who have seen PaperKlay from the ground up, know that Kev was really, really leaning towards like specifically more of a cozy sort of atmosphere. It was more of like something cozy with relaxing music. At first, I was kind of utilizing earlier prototypes or earlier samples of the song. But then once Kev started to sort of open up the doors to like voice acting and realizing I actually I'm more so leaning towards like Banjo-Kazooie with humor and, you know, wackiness, then that earlier prototype didn't really fit what we were going for. So specifically the Nugget levels, it's a lot more wacky and so.
And I bet, like, I don't remember exactly how the penguin looked, but I remember those twisting and turning levels that are Nugget levels today.
Yeah.
Like, trying to capture that character as well is like the penguin versus Nugget is a big difference.
No, absolutely. And you know, I only made maybe 1 or 2 tracks for the penguin prototype. We didn't really have time to sort of explore where it was going to go. You know, as far as I knew, it was going to be a very just easygoing sort of quick game where you played, I don't know, 15, 20 smaller levels, and then that was it.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't really a lot of thought process going into like, what's the story saying, all that stuff. But when PaperKlay started, there's a big old story that I needed to make sure that my musical sort of approach was telling the story as it should. So.
Yeah, and for people who don't really understand what we're really talking about with these Nugget levels, just to give an idea, for people that have been playing Captain Toad, for example, and Treasure something, I don't remember.
Treasure Tracker.
The Treasure Tracker, yeah. It's kind of those dioramas where you just have like a level in the air and you just twist and turn, you go around corners and the camera kind of follows around. And it's just sweet. I really love and adore them.
Yeah, I love those levels.
I think the Nugget levels are like a top level style for me in this game.
It's really, really fun, and it's a nice little or it's a little break from the platforming to just use your brain in a different way. So
yeah, it's the right kind of puzzle for my brain. I love those kind of logical puzzles where you can just look and utilize your strategy, brains, and your know-how basically, and it's playful, very playful.
Very.
And yeah, I think it's time for us to just dive into the second track of the week, because even though we're having a good conversation, time is flying.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so the next track that we're going to listen to, we're basically visiting this other character. Well, frogs, are they characters or not? They're just animals, I guess. So the first character of the week, I would say then, as we're going to Blinky's Lake. Blinky's Lake. So my emotion for Blinky. I cannot avoid this, but to me this track just oozes Rayman Legends and all the quirky sounds that came with it. But that does not mean it is bad the other way around. It comes with a high charm and humor. The kazoo that is playing, I'm just a definite sucker for that one. It's like, in my opinion, the kazoo is like the best instrument ever, hands down. But it's because I love those kind of things, quirkiness and weird ass shit. Anyway, the strings that is kind of going up and then going down with the plonks, and the humming of the kazoo, that they play a good role with each other. They're focusing on the fun in the music and the melody. Even though the track is overall easygoing, I still feel that we may accomplish anything when I'm listening to this. And yeah, that is my emotion for Blinky's Lake.
So before I kind of explain the overview, it's so funny that you said Rayman Legends, because Rayman is also kind of up there in my favorite games. The original Rayman, and I've played Rayman Legends, and once again, just like you did with Zelda, you sort of predicted what other games I've played, or subliminally what soundtracks I've already listened to. Because now that I think about it, you're right. It does sound a little bit like Rayman Legends, and I didn't even know that. So, oh my goodness!
Like this is also like a topic I've been talking to a little bit about with certain composers who think more strongly about these subjects as well. Like sometimes you don't really like to have like strong references and so on, because you might be like too, I would say, they will have such an impact on you that you might go full Donkey Kong Country if somebody referenced Donkey Kong Country. Right. Like, how do you feel about it? Since we're starting to feel like an unconscious level here.
No, like it's even just talking to you on this podcast, I'm learning something about myself, because I do listen to all types of not just video game music, but other types of music. And there are times that I do little runs that come from like a completely different genre of music, you know, outside of video games. So I'm noticing that because I do listen to a lot of different music, sometimes when I think of like my approach to making a track, I'm thinking about like some of the storytelling and the chords that I want to do. But then once I get to a point where now I can kind of just let it flow, it seems to come out of me from completely different genres or video games soundtracks for this one I absolutely wanted to lean into a kazoo. It was a plugin that I bought that had a bunch of different, like, I thought I was going to use it maybe once or twice, but I loved it so much that I literally used it for like most of the tracks. So what I wanted to do was have something that was obviously very sort of bluegrassy, with some kazoos and some marimba runs that sort of, you know, the climbs that go up and then down kind of signify sort of like Blinky's sort of aesthetic. You know, he's up one moment and then he's like down one moment and then he's up again and then he's down again, like mentally. He's there and then he's not there and then he's there and he's not there. So there's a lot of different runs
he's
that
everywhere.
I did. Yes, he is. I'm pretty sure there's a Blinky in all of us.
I hope so, because that would be so much more hilarious if it were. So definitely, I definitely hope so, because we all deserve a little bit of a Blinky inside of us. Okay, that sounded weird.
I think that, you know, if you're an adult, if you're a millennial, you're absolutely prone to feeling like Blinky on some days, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I wonder what sleep is like. Is it like daydreaming with your eyes closed? Yes. Felt. It is felt, Blinky.
Yeah. But considering also within this project, like, we haven't really talked about, since you started out with the Nuggets levels, like, in the beginning, as I remember it, it was this area, the Frog Cove and Blinky's Lake, the first biome that was firstly set within this game. How did you, what was your first initial ideas? Did you experiment first, trying to get into, like, how would the music sound like in PaperKlay? Or did you utilize the older tracks as some sort of reference and kind of stemmed from there? Yeah,
so funny story. The very first, like, original PaperKlay track that I made, I had actually caught in COVID. And I wasn't really thinking too clearly at that moment, but I was trying to make something that would fit a demo that Kevin was trying to release, and I wanted to make sure that I did that. So I wasn't overthinking too much on, like, you know, am I pulling from this and that and this? I just kind of made something that felt good and that was comforting. And I think the first prototype that I made, I keep saying prototype, the first sample that I made didn't have any of the marimbas or, you know, any of the banjo in it. It was mostly just the chords themselves with some of the percussion. And when I sent that, Kev said, yep, this is sounding good. And then later on, I sort of included some of the other elements like the marimba and the xylophone and some of the other runs. You know, a lot of the songs, you know, they started out sounding like they're the same song, but then once we started leaning towards more of the banjo kazooie sort of vibe, I would start including things like maybe a kazoo here, or making certain chords like a little bit wackier instead of just strictly a sort of classic kind of cozy atmosphere. So yeah, it's a lot of it was like starting prototype, just make it cozy, utilize, you know, songs from Tearaway or Yoshi's Crafted World, etc. And then once we kind of got the green light to be like, no, we're gonna make some wackiness here, then I started listening to Banjo-Kazooie and studying that. So yeah,
something that is more playful in the art style and how they kind of portray the characters in a sense, because Tearaway is more of a serious game in that matter, but still a very beautiful game. But considering also the different kind of tracks that we're going to listen to, a lot of these tracks are more selected throughout the game for the biomes and for the different kind of areas and so on. Sometimes in order to kind of portray something, you kind of have some sort of motif for a character and so on walking around in this world. Is there any motifs set for our main protagonists for this game within the music?
Yes, there are.
And why is it the kazoo?
And why did you say why isn't it the kazoo?
Yeah, why is it the kazoo?
Oh yeah, the kazoo is the motif. Yeah, no. So there's two motifs that I've used.
Okay.
The first is the sort of theme song motif, which was made by Grant Kirkhope and Stephen Mellon, and the motif goes do 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 blah, 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 blah. And so I utilized that in a few different areas in different ways too. Like I think when you introduce like one of the, I don't want to make any spoilers, but you know, in sort of the beginning, they use the motifs to sort of introduce them as a character, and then towards the end of the game, they'll utilize the motif kind of differently, you know, change up sort of the key signature itself, but utilize some of the same things. But the one that's been used quite a lot, like maybe 4 or 5 times, is the Nox motif. And that has a very distinctive sort of signature sort of run, so a signature sort of melody earworm that people were starting to pick up on who weren't even musicians. And I was like, yes, it's working. That makes me so happy. So
yeah. But when you create the music for areas, now we'll listen to two different area music, so to speak. When you're making music for a biome like this, even though they're kind of alike, what are you trying to capture the most within the music? Is there something that is more important to you when you're thinking about the music and what you're trying to convey for a game in that sense?
I think that for me and my writing style, it's much more important for me to create music that fits what's on screen versus being, you know, a very seasoned, advanced, you know, theory master trying to make something that just doesn't fit. I think that sometimes like my approach is less is more. I do prefer to like, you know, make things that kind of come from me very naturally. I don't study a lot of theory, but I study enough of it to, you know, to like, if I want to tell a story, if I want to convey that this is a sad moment or this is a wacky moment or happy moment, it's very important that I know what the key signature is, but I also don't want to overdo it. So when I make music, that's sort of my approach. Let me know if that answered your question.
No, I like that answer. It felt like it fit more on the general type of how you think. So when we were looking at the two different tracks that we have here, that is from the same biome, we have Frog Cove and Blinky's Lake that we've listened to so far. It's like they're from the same biome, they're from the same kind of, but they are a little bit different. So when we're looking at these two, it's like, what is it that makes them so different to each other, even though they're from the same kind of place?
Yeah, so I would say the idea that Frog Cove, it's the opening track. For me, my priority was making a song that wanted you to, made you want to start your adventure, whether or not it had to do with the characters. But once we got to Blinky's Lake, the focus was on Blinky sort of being a main character. And so that's what kind of separated my idea of like, okay, I don't want to make this one like too cozy like Frog Cove, I want this to lean into the wacky because you're going to be experiencing Blinky all the time. So I want to make sure that we have a song that really matches that and that energy. And a lot of times when I'm working on levels, it's a little daunting at first.
Yeah.
If Kev says, can you start making something for me? And there's not really much to the level. He just has like the idea, it's going to be, a pirate level, or it's going to be an underwater level, or, in a snowstorm, whatever it is. Like, I can get certain ideas going, but until I know sort of what the level layout's going to be and what characters are going to be in there, what, who you're going to interact with, all of those things are really, really, really important. So I can write something that kind of fits what we're going for. So, yeah.
Yeah. Then Frog Cove is more of like an environmental kind of song, while Blinky's Lake is more a character song.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly.
Did you ever end up in a level where you were able to make a level and then later Kev's decided to make like, there should be a boss or a character within this level? And what were your approach in that case, if that happened?
Yeah, so there was one specific case. This was for one of the levels called Purring Depths, and the atmosphere was completely different color. And originally I was writing something that was kind of a Donkey Kong, like a David Wise-esque sort of like epic song. If you've listened to Donkey Kong Country, there's a lot of songs that have that sort of epic kind of feel to it. And I approached that using a certain key signature and orchestral drums, like nice and big and full. And then the color completely changed. So it went from like green, I think it was, and then it went to like a purple, like a dark purple. And I said, this isn't spooky enough. You know what I mean? And so in that very moment, I was able to make it sound really, really like a lot spookier by using like a theremin. I know we'll probably be playing that song here in a little bit, but yeah, so I still kept the same movements and chords. I changed it from like what's called like minor key signature to a Phrygian key signature, which gives it more of a spooky fit, and I think we made that work. But yeah, anyway, so there are those moments when the level isn't fully developed. We don't know who's going to be in there, and all I can really do is do my best to make something that fits where it's going to go, while not completing a song until the level is ready enough. So yeah.
Great answer, I would say. I really like that answer. And it kind of portrays also how it is to actually work on a smaller level. Because if you're working with a high-end studio, they might already have everything available or everything set down. But working with somebody that doesn't even know what will happen the next day, it is so much different.
It depends. Sometimes in those bigger AAA companies, you don't have anything and you're relying on your team. And other times, like if it's a series that's already been started, right? If you're making the second Spider-Man, for example, you know where you're going to go. But if it's a brand new concept and story, that your guess is as good as mine. So
yeah.
But yeah.
Well, but with that said, I think it's time for us to dive into the next track of the week. And this will be a little bit of a palette cleanser, as we are going into the mini boss. There we had the mini-boss of this episode. So, my emotion for this one. Here we do not have many new instruments of any kind, but the track somehow feels like a love child between Middle Eastern music and Donkey Kong Country to me. I don't know how, but it's kind of what I felt when I was listening to this. It has this faster pacing, which would trigger a more fight or flight kind of moment for the player, as it adds a little bit more stress from a music standpoint. But it surely has this kind of boss aesthetic of a track. Short notes and a tad mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
So now I want to hear a little bit. What was the thought process of making mini-boss music here?
So a lot of the songs that I had been working on previously had a more laid-back approach. You know, is a lot slower. You know, sometimes it would swing, sometimes it wouldn't. But it was definitely a slower tempo. But with boss battles, I really wanted to lean into like the way like Grant Kirkhope made faster songs that had a very a quicker pulse. And I felt like there were some like the layout for the game in general just didn't call for a lot of fast tempoed songs because it might make the player kind of feel like overwhelmed. But for the boss battle, it was like the perfect fit to really lean into the faster tempo. But yeah, this song specifically borrows instruments from a different level because of the layout. And it borrows from the same world, but it borrows it from a different level. And so yeah, this has a lot of an Aztec tribal sort of feel to it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the chants that you hear are actually voiced by my friend Nero Negron, and he helped with that. He's also going to be the voice of Referee in the Riverside. He's awesome. He's awesome. Anyway, and so he actually recorded those chants, the singing, but everything else was sample based. So
nice. Because considering that you're taking reference a little bit from Grant Kirkhope in how he kind of worked, did you listen in specifically on how he did boss music? And how much boss music have you made previous to this?
Okay, yeah. So I just knew that I wanted this to be in a Phrygian scale, which kind of is more of the eerie or spooky or evil, you know, depending on like what genre you're making. I knew I wanted to approach it with that, but I wasn't actually studying any like specific boss songs from Banjo-Kazooie. I was more so, I just kind of knew that I wanted a quicker tempo. And previously I had made about, I want to say 7 or 8 boss tracks for The Adventures of the Carrot Captain, the game that I was telling you about previously. So yeah, I have worked on boss music. I've played a lot of games, so I think it just kind of came out of me just subliminally, like, make it faster, make it Phrygian. But I didn't specifically study any Banjo-Kazooie boss battles. So.
Okay. Considering also that we were talking about speed and so on as well, I know you're a fan of the Sonic games, as you said before, but I also know, and while watching through your Instagram, I know you are a fond Sonic fan as well, as you're cosplaying. Yeah, I'm a fan of the character itself, but I'm not a fan of the games, because everything Sonic stands for does not really come out through games, in my opinion.
Got it.
So I have a really hard standpoint on that one. But considering that, like when we're talking about music and so on, you have the rock and roll and you really have the speed in a Sonic game, and they kind of convey and keep the same kind of structure within the boss battle music as well for the games. Like, is that something you usually kind of tend to think about as well, that you kind of want to keep a core even when you're making boss music? Or do you like more of a contrast to boss music when you're making them? Or is this from project to project maybe?
Project to project, probably. I know that, like, you know, it's less about if it's a boss or a level, and more so like what is happening in the boss battle. Because I know there are boss battles that might kind of be laid back. I mean, if we look at Tears of the Kingdom and you're doing the final, you know, the final Ganondorf battle, the music is very, very laid back. It's eerie sounding, but it's laid back. There isn't a lot of tempo, and that's because of the pacing of it. So sometimes I pay more close attention to the pacing of a boss battle or a level versus, you know, hey, this is a boss battle, just make it fast. Because sometimes it doesn't call for that. So yeah.
So how did the conversation between you and Kevin then go? If we're talking about the pacing of a boss battle, then like did he do like reference shots for you that you could kind of utilize a video and just get an idea of the pacing? Or
he sent me early prototypes. He didn't have it completely like, you know, ready, but he showed me what was happening, you know, like, and the pacing the player must take to avoid the obstacles. And I said, okay, I know what we're going to make now. But, you know, early concept of him saying, oh, can we make a mini boss battle? I was like, yes. Can you tell me more about, you know, what's going to happen in the boss battle? So,
Because from what I understand through that answer, he had the main bosses within the game already done, and he wanted to make a mini boss battles on top of that later. Then,
Yeah, I forget. If you know that, then yeah.
I didn't know that for sure, because even though I've been following this project for a long time, I haven't been following it like every stream that he's done and so on. The only thing I did from a tester perspective was playing through the game. I was testing all the different boss battles and gave basically feedback on them. So I don't fully know the order that he released everything. If he did,
you're probably
mini bosses
right.
and then boss battles.
Everything became kind of a blur, but I believe you. I think you're probably right. So
we'll go with that, though.
Yeah, no, and so yeah, no, I remember that I wanted to make something similar to that. Another fast-paced one. This one, because it's the grand finale, it's like make it that same tempo, but like make the energy and the eeriness like up to 10. So yeah.
When we're talking about mini bosses as well, there aren't just one. I'm betting you utilize the same mini boss battle for each and every boss.
Yes and no. I mean, yes, like consistency is really important if you're conveying a specific mood to the pacing and sort of the idea that it's a boss battle. If you're conveying that consistently, then yeah, it's very important to keep the same tempo, maybe utilize some of the same instruments, import some of the instruments into your new project, just so you start with that consistency. But then there's other times that you're borrowing from other levels, and that was kind of my process. So.
Okay. So when we're looking at the mini bosses themselves, there might have smaller changes to them for each and every mini boss then.
Yeah, so there are I don't want to spoil anything, but there aren't a lot of boss battles. So it was pretty easy for me to determine that we were going to stick with these we were going to stick with just the sort of consistency of having a faster pace and having just wackiness and stuff too. So
that's great. Yeah. So another thing that I figured out now as we're going through this kind of structure as we're going on. We haven't listened to the other biomes, but we will be doing that shortly as well. But as you started out with just I would say the kind of meadow biome of this game, which is the first area of this game. The second one he was doing, if I remember correctly, was the wintry one, the winter edition or winter biome. Like when you started seeing that he was diving into another biome, what was your first idea or first kind of structure of everything?
Yeah, so throughout the game, I wanted to borrow instruments that really were sort of the signature PaperKlay instrument. Sometimes I'd swap them out here and there, but for the most part, I wanted to keep the acoustic guitar and sort of the softer percussion. Just I wanted to keep that through each world. But for this one specifically, I knew I had to have classic jingle bells in there and utilize those instruments.
Yeah.
But then there's other instruments like the orchestral bell and the glockenspiel. There's a lot of instruments that give that sort of wintry vibe that I definitely wanted to use in this entire biome. So yeah.
Was that like making a Christmas track without bells is almost impossible from what I understand.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. It is crazy.
I guess if you're making like a smooth jazz, with like warm, vocals, then maybe that would excuse no jingle bells. That the classic the classic sort of 50s or 60s Christmas song, but no, otherwise no.
Otherwise no. That's very interesting. No, but since we're talking about jingle bells and so on, I think it's so much easier for us to just dive down into that track and just talk a little bit more about a wintry theme and a little bit more about the core instruments of PaperKlay then. So let's dive down into Shilling Library. Fading out, Shilling Library. While other tracks gave me more of an identity to an emotion of how I feel when I was doing something, this track adds more of an ambience to the area, it seems. It adds this tenseness, almost crystallizing it. Music-wise, I feel like I am inside a cave filled with crystals, but it has this kind of wintry background to it, hence the bells. So maybe I would be up high in the mountains, maybe? I don't know. The track, it is very calm, and it creates this space of harmony to some extent. But it is also far from what it actually is, as when you run around in this game, you're running around with a lot of books around you. It doesn't really necessarily give you this kind of wintry aesthetic, since there's no snow, etc. for this. So considering now is not so much your thing, because it is Kevin that has been working on the game, putting this book level, but it kind of portrays well within this game, considering the theme of how you go to levels. So it is so interesting, because you kind of jump into books, and that will take you to all the levels. And this is the concept of everything within, just like Mario has the paintings to jump into. But anyway, going back to the track itself, Shilling Library, like I said here, it conveys more like the area than what I'm actually doing. Like I felt more with Frog Cove and Blinky's Lake, for example. Was this something intended, or is this something just that I felt listening to this?
No, I intended for this to be a little bit of a breakaway from the sort of cutesy or wacky atmosphere, to kind of, give a little bit of a call and response, an ebb and flow to how the player's feeling. Because, throughout the journey, I wanted to convey that Chicken Nugget aren't always just in a happy, upbeat mood, but, sometimes they're feeling a little bit lost, because, it's really dark in this level, and there's distant wind ambiance going on. And I wanted this to be a moment for those two to kind of feel, is this the right thing? Is this journey that we wanted to go on? Are we doing this correctly? Should we have turned back? I wanted to convey a little bit of that. So it is internal for them, but it also, my intention was to make it represent the level itself, which is it has a very, like you said, it has harmony, and it conveys that sort of Christmassy sort of aesthetic, but it's not bright and cheery like Christmas music, because of the key signature that I chose, and some of the pianos that kind of go off into the distance. So yeah,
because that is something that is really kind of portrayed throughout this level as well. Like we're talking about having the shear of Chicken and Nugget. During the winter, it feels like I'm going through a full Christmas period, basically. Just feeling the cheer and the jolly and everything. Yep. And then the Shilling Library becomes the contrast to that. But I really like that contrast. Like you're saying, you're bringing something else, you're having something internally and so on. But from what I understood, listening to this and listening to the other track, now I haven't really dove deep into the other track, so this is just on the surface level that I'm scratching on this, but it feels like you're utilizing less amount of instruments for this track.
Yeah.
Could that be a thing?
I think so. It's so what I would say, like, yes, you're correct. There's the same amount of instruments, but they're playing less. And I'm letting sort of the notes that they play linger a little bit more. I'm putting, effects on it that kind of make it drift off into the distance a little bit. So it's still filling up the space, but it's filling up the space with like longer notes rather than quick bursts of just like, goofy runs. So yeah, I would say the same amount of instruments a lot of times, maybe removing one or two from like other songs, but mostly it's just focused on letting notes extend out into the distance.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sweet. And since we're talking about the instruments as well, I just want to go back a little bit to when you were talking about the different kind of core instruments that you utilize. You had the acoustic guitar, etc. When it comes to the different biomes and so on, like when you were presented with, like, we're not necessarily going to talk about the pirate area or the world of this game. So that would be like a great example to talk a little bit about when you utilize the core instrument versus new instrument that might be obtained when you get to a new biome in order to create another soundscape and so on.
Yeah.
It's like when you got the information, like, hey, I'm making this pirate area, like, did you feel already from the get-go, like, oh, pirate works well, and it works well with acoustic guitar, it works well with this and that, and so on, out of your core instruments in that sense?
Yeah.
Or did you feel like, okay, that didn't work too well, so we're actually pulling away some of these core instruments that almost kind of could theoretically represent, if we're using the kazoo to represent the protagonist in this case, for example?
Yeah, so a lot of times when I go to these new biomes and I know that aesthetically and environmentally they're going to be different, I usually know that I want to include certain instruments or replace certain instruments, but I don't know which one. Do I want to include it with the soundscape that we already have, or do I want to, or do I need to replace them? Like, there's certain moments, like in the pirate levels, where I use a hurdy-gurdy, which is like a very old instrument that was used back in the, I forget what century. I don't forget my music history, but
a century.
Yeah. And so I knew that there are certain instruments that kind of occupied that frequency that I knew I would probably need to replace. Or if I didn't replace it, I knew that I wouldn't be able to play both of those instruments while the hurdy-gurdy was playing. I also knew that, in some cases, you just need to start completely from scratch. I felt like, I feel like consistently, like, having certain instruments, like playing a rhythm pattern on my lap, I knew I wanted to include that with a lot of these songs, because that just kind of universally will fit with anything.
Yeah.
But there were definitely moments, like using piano and Christmas bells. Obviously, I knew that I needed to take that out when we were going into the water world. So, yeah.
Okay. That is so interesting. Like, when you're talking about the different kind of, like, what you need to pull out and so on, it's like, what do you utilize when you get a new biome in order to kind of understand, like, which instrument might work and one might not? Like, is that something you just go, like, yeah, bells doesn't really suit this? Or is it that you start making something and then you just like, oh, no, this is totally wrong, and then you just redo?
A little bit of both, honestly. For me, there's nothing to lose to trying something out and realizing, yeah, this isn't fitting. Sometimes it's just subjective. Everything that I'm saying could be subjective. Somebody might prefer a certain instrument in the songs because that's their favorite instrument or whatever. So this is always my interpretation on, how I would approach it,
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's about studying, like, what works well for other games and pulling from that. But other times it's just about getting creative with what you feel might feel right to you. So it was a little bit of both. I think mostly I just went into certain biomes going, we got to have the hurdy-gurdy. We have to have these little pirate, string hits. Like, we have to do that. It's like inevitable. But I also wanted to make sure that I tried it with other instruments to make sure that, like, I wasn't missing out on something else. So it was a little bit of both, honestly.
But I'm guessing you didn't really have a hurdy-gurdy ready for you. Was that
no.
like
sample?
Yeah, so was that like a sample pack you already owned, or was that more like, I definitely want a hurdy-gurdy pack for this kind of music, and you bought that?
There were instruments that I knew I did not have in my in my lineup. Sometimes I would download the demo of an instrument plugin to test it out and just to make sure that it worked. And when it did work, I went and bought it. There are also times that I could just sample something from like, I could resample something. So if there's like an instrument that I really like that I have, but it needs to, like, be deeper and I need to kind of repurpose it in some way, I would sometimes record that and then do that way with so I didn't have everything at once. I had to sort of look at where I was going and then say, I need to buy this and this and this and this. So yeah.
But doesn't that come also with a risk, or is the demos enough for you to make that judgment call?
Yeah.
To know that you would like to have this pack.
A lot of the demos, if you buy an instrument and you want to try it out, a lot of times it won't allow you to just play the entire performance. It'll sort of interrupt it
like bypass it, at random. So you can't actually record it and steal it. But I didn't need to worry about that because I was just trying to compare the textures and see how it feels. And then once I said, yep, this is good, then I went and purchased it. It really depends. There's some that you aren't allowed to get the demo. So I would go record something from YouTube, just like a little snippet of it, and test it in there and be like, oh yeah, this is great. And then I would go and find a sample of, or I would go find an instrument and then I would buy it. Like the hurdy-gurdy was one of those. I actually believe the hurdy-gurdy was like $2 if I'm remembering correctly. There are some,
not a lot of money at least.
Yeah, there was some that were just really inexpensive. Like the kazoo, very inexpensive, and that one ended up being like a fan favorite. So
well spent money then.
But that's how game composition goes. The purpose is to use what you have, but when you need something for a project that's gonna like make or break the project, you invest in it. So.
Definitely, well said. That is definitely something I love when composers talk about openly as well, to actually give off the realism of what's going on. Being a composer is not rainbows and sunshine all the time. You definitely struggle from time to time as well, but sometimes you can really make gold out of those struggles, and I would bet in the end it's well worth it, right?
Absolutely. I would, it's a really tough industry because at default, especially in the indie scene, people don't just have, hundreds of thousands of dollars to throw at you. So it's a give and take, and it's an understanding that you invest your own money into getting instruments that are going to make the soundtrack thrive. You can be smart about it. If you don't need the highest quality of something, if it's just going to get mixed and mastered, low in the mix, you can, be smart about that stuff. But I would say for anybody like who wants to become a composer, like don't be afraid to invest your own money in something that's going to like make the soundtrack what it needs to be. So, yeah.
Because even if you're utilizing $2 to make a hurdy-gurdy, that might be the soundtrack that elevates you to the composer, where you can thrive the most.
Yep. Because I wasn't making a full-on hurdy-gurdy song, like just the hurdy-gurdy. I knew that I could, buy one that was on the cheaper side, because I'm mixing it into a song and I'm kind of pushing it into the background to kind of fill up the atmosphere. So yeah, it worked out really, really good. So
that's great. So let's say less expensive instrument were put in the background and let everybody else shine, but they kind of elevated a bit then.
And like I said, it depends. Don't go cheap if you have an opportunity that is gonna help you grow. Invest that. But I didn't need to make an entire hurdy-gurdy song, so I went with that one, and it worked out really good.
Yeah. So one thing that kind of is important in my opinion, a lot of us making developments talk about killing your darlings. It sounds very horrible, but bear with me. It's usually like, oh, we're making this feature, we're making this. The character should jump. They should double jump. We don't have time to make the double jump, so we actually need to cut that out. It's like when you're making a track, and it's like, do you have like an idea or a structure for yourself to know when to kill your darling or kill a process that feels like, oh, I'm getting nowhere?
Sure. I think that a lot of times, I can evaluate and say, this is leaning somewhat in the right direction, but I need to change this and this and this. And it's, I guess you would call savable. Other times it's just flat out not the right approach, and you just start from scratch. It really depends. Luckily, I feel like a lot of the approach that I took, kind of taking my time, waiting until Kev fleshed things out, I was really able to sort of head in the right direction. One of the songs, the one I was telling you about earlier, I did need to change a few things, like the key signature. I needed to add like a different instrument in there so it fit the atmosphere. But most of the time, I would say like 95% of the time, I never had to kill my darlings. So yeah, very grateful. Okay. That's not always the case. So
yeah. That I would say that is like a skill itself, to actually being able to end up in those kind of situations where you're actually hitting the correct mark over and over again. because that could be just a lucky strike as well.
Sure.
But at the same time, it could be just the moment where everybody's kind of ending up in the flow and everything is just correct at this point in time.
To be fair, maybe I am actually killing my darlings, but I'm killing it so early in the game. You know, if I'm trying out an idea and it just doesn't sound good, it's like immediately gone, dead, you know?
Yeah.
But then once I know where it's heading, then, you know, then of course I got to figure out like later on after the level is developed if it's working or not. But yeah, I usually catch it early on.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Have you had any certain kind of experience in order for you to be able to identify these early stages in some sense? Is that why?
Just teeny time and experience. So
okay, time and experience.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do to teach yourself that. You just know, you feel it in your bones if something is or isn't working.
Yeah. So it comes with experience then.
Yep.
And talking about experience, we already talked about changing the backgrounds a bit, because right now what I'm doing is a great segue over to the last track of the week. Because we talked about this track already this week, as we are going into the Purring depths. There we have it, folks. The last track of the week, Purring Depth. And with the strings of a boss battle, but the steps of curiosity of a dark cave. This track blends between fear, mystery, and goosebumps. When one thinks of a game, and what I just said here, the music really took the wrong turn somewhere. But don't take my words like right here and right now, because the level where this track is played is like a basement level from a Tom and Jerry game. Like, it is dark, it is damp, and it is filled with pipes going around. And just to have this said as well, when I listened to this track, I was like, I don't remember this track at all. And I had to go into the game, and just to make the pure reference of this so everybody understands, I played the play test. And I went to this specific level, and it was not the same track whatsoever. So this track was actually brand new to me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was so much fun, actually, because in my opinion, when listening to something playing through, I had one feeling, and listening to this brand new track for this specific level, it actually fits so much better game-wise. But like I said in my emotion here, like for me who have been playing this but listening this, kind of trying to dissect the track from the game to understand a little bit what emotion I feel. Like we have this very colorful, happy-go-lucky, humorous game, and all of a sudden we have this music. Like it felt like we ended up in PaperKlay's world of like a Dark Souls game to some extent. So I would love to hear a little bit more about the thought process here, having something not entirely different, but something different that did not have this kind of tenseness in the track that it ended up getting.
Yeah, so this song in particular kind of borrowed the same, inspiration of, moving away from the cozy or the wacky to do something that kind of tapped more into Chicken Nugget's emotions that they were feeling. And this one has a little bit more of a mysterious and a little bit of that fear that you're talking about, there, and again, not to spoil anything, but in this level, a lot of fear is being struck in the players. So I wanted to sort of reference that. I kind of lean towards more of like a Flight of the Zinger from DK2 soundtrack, using a little bit more of like an epic kind of vibe to it while still maintaining its identity with like silly instruments. And yeah, so I used... for the pipes, I used like the drum bone, from Blue Man Group. I was really inspired by using that. So it still keeps sort of a playful aesthetic and not being overly like metal sounding. There's a few metal sound effects that are in there that I wanted to incorporate, but I really wanted to still maintain its sort of identity of like crafted instruments, right? Things that you hit that you could find laying around the house, for example. So yeah.
Yeah. And if I'm not misremembering, this is also one, well, considering the last boss of the game that you will kind of meet throughout the game, and everybody who's watched the trailer will already know who that is. But if I remember correctly, this is one of the last new characters in this level that you will meet.
Correct.
If I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yep.
And this character itself kind of gives a little bit off more of this kind of goosebumps and fear vibe as well. Like you were talking about Nugget's fear. And this is something that has been like growing over the course of this adventure, which I feel like, yes, you're really getting a good grasp of this, like what you're kind of portraying and so on. But considering how the music kind of evolves over the course of time, for me, when I made my picks, I picked the mini boss and I picked the Shilling Library, and you picked Frog Cove, Blinky's Lake, and Purring Depths. So like we still had the pirate world to select a little bit from, but in my opinion, considering how the music was made there, it kind of has similarities to Frog Cove and Blinky's Lake, just other instruments to some extent.
Yep.
So I would say we have the biggest kind of contrast in style when we actually enter by the end of the game.
Yes.
So Purring Depths is actually one of the first tracks you will hear in this new biome without making any sort of spoilers. And it really grasps you right from the get-go. So I really like that kind of part. Was this also something intentionally from you music-wise, or was this more of an idea you got through the biome and through what Kevin was doing level-wise?
So remember earlier when I was mentioning that, it went from like a dark green atmosphere to like purple? That was this level. So I originally was making something that didn't have any of the theremin, the ghost sound, if you will. It didn't have any of that. It was in more of a sort of... So the reference that Kev actually sent me was Lord of the Rings. I forget which song it was, but I knew what he was looking for, because I knew that I wasn't going to make just a full-on Lord of the Rings soundtrack. It was going to have some silly instruments and stuff like that. But I knew exactly what he meant. It was like the pacing and the rhythm. And so, yeah, the first instance that I made, it was in like a minor key signature, which is like... if you play the A and then you go all the way up an octave, all the white keys. Anyway, but I ended up changing it to the Phrygian, which is like the jaws, the root note, and then a half step up, So I changed to that, and then I also added the theremin, and I feel like I changed one other minor thing, but most of it stayed. Most of it still stayed. I just wanted to make sure that I really leaned into the Halloween atmosphere a little bit more since it changed. So yeah.
So with this change, you went from the minor, which is, I would say, from my understanding of minors, since I don't know exactly fully within this, I'm the newbie in music, so to speak, in this case, just a happy enthusiast. So going from minor would say you actually went like a little bit lower on the scale. So it considering the contrast that we're getting, or not getting, because people haven't heard the previous version, but I'm guessing it was a little bit more happy-go-lucky, like tone-wise, and you went a little bit darker with this new purple background.
Exactly. So the minor and the Phrygian, the only difference is the second note is dropped down. So that's when you hear the jaws, the do-do, do-do. That's a root note and a half step. So if you ever want to make a Phrygian scale, just start there. And fun fact.
It felt almost like I started listening to the Jaws.
Anyway, that's how I remember. It's not always my go-to if I'm trying to make something that's mysterious or strikes fear, but it kind of is a great place to start. Anyway, long story short, it was a very subtle change that I made to the entire composition, but from the get-go, I knew that I wanted to make something that was sort of like a Lord of the Rings meets Flight of the Zinger from DK2. It was something like that with some of the same instrument choices or like cousin instruments that kind of fit the aesthetic that PaperKlay was calling for. So yeah.
When we're talking about Purring's depths as well, when Frog Cove and Blinky's Cave were more focused on the levels themselves and Chilling started to go a little bit more on the inside, is Purring depths also more towards the inner core of the protagonists?
Yeah, I think so. I also I always like to make a little made up story in my head that one of the main characters that are in this specific level, that's like his theme song that he created. But it is supposed to be internally what Chicken Nugget are going through. So yeah.
Okay. Now everybody has a small little bingo game they can play with themselves when they're playing a game. Is this a chick or a nugget song?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or maybe both.
Or both, yeah.
Yeah. Nobody knows. And they can only... Well, everybody will reach out to you now. It's like, hey, is this track this character?
Yeah. Question. I don't even... some of these I don't know. No. I don't know what I'm doing, Chris.
Oh, that's lovely. No, but I think that is important as well. I mean, sometimes the artist, in this case you just create something that doesn't necessarily have a answer. This is something I started talking to a lot of composers about as well. And it kind of... Sometimes I feel bad about bringing my emotions forward and it's like almost like forcing. This is what I felt. And sometimes composer can be like, yeah, you feel whatever you like.
Sure. Yeah, dude, it really depends. I would say PaperKlay does have, a story-driven approach, but it's not like you're not making it's not super story focused, right? It's got a charming story and it has all those things, but it's not over the top, it's not super, it's not an anime, for example. If it was an anime, you would probably put in the emotion that the character was feeling as the primary inspiration. But for this, it's a little bit of both. I feel like I wanted to make sure that it was just at minimum just something that people could hum while they're playing, and was more focused on the experience of just make it universal, right? I'll make something that internally could be fitting, or it could just fit the atmosphere itself, not necessarily fit on some of the cutscenes that are in this were definitely centered around the emotions that the characters were feeling, right? But for the levels themselves, it was a little bit open-ended.
Yeah, because I feel like when you're making a cinematic, it becomes more like a movie. Yeah. And when you're making a movie, you want to feel sadness or happiness, whatever's happening on the screen.
Yes.
You don't want it to be just too general, because then it's just ambience.
And there's nothing wrong with too general, but if you can catch it early enough and say, this is working, but now I need to focus on it attaching the character or doing, whatever, then recognizing that early on to be able to
fix it before you move it all the way to the finish line. So yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, we've been talking for 1 hour and I would say record-wise, 46 minutes at least right now. It's been so much fun, but I think we're starting to get to the end as well as time moves on here. But I have 2 questions, main questions that I ask each and every composer that gets to this show. Mm-hmm. And I already prepared you a little bit to this, as I usually do. But let's actually start out with the first one. And when it came to this project, you already worked with Kevin once before. So I guess that actually helped a little bit better, understanding each other, and you following him on Twitch also helps a lot, understanding who he is, etc. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, what was the challenge working with Kevin again on this project with the music?
So, if I'm going to be really honest, I feel so grateful and so lucky. There was literally no challenges. The only challenge was time zones, I think. No, sometimes I wanted to ask him a question as I was working away in my afternoon, which he was asleep at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think the only challenge itself is that Kev, for better or for worse, he really entrusted in my sort of approach in how I make things, because he wouldn't know how to explain what he was asking for. So my challenge was getting to know, his tastes, and when he said something, even if it was a general sense, to be able to, depict what he wanted from me while also infusing what I think would work the best. So it was a marriage of both. I think those are the only 2 things. And of course, being an indie dev, you have tons of work on your plate, a ton of work. I also worked on the sound effects for the game. The challenge would be things like that, not having help and maybe trying to get things scheduled around, our opposing schedules, because I'm based in California. Other than that, though, it was a breeze working with Kev, on a personal level, on a, just he's got such great ideas, and it was so easy to just have the passion behind it to want to make some really, really good stuff. So
yeah, definitely. So I guess you if I have interviewed you for Hoplegs, we might have had a challenge in that sense then.
It's funny because Hoplegs was easier on me because there wasn't a bunch of story, and we borrowed a lot of songs. So in some case it might have actually been easier, but I mean, it was more challenging because I was getting to know melodies and keys a little bit more. It's become a little bit more second nature for me than when I was first starting out, because I'm originally, like I was telling you earlier, I've mostly been a rhythm person, drumming and stuff like that, and then I really started to pick up on theory in 2016. So almost 9 years ago. My goodness.
Time flies.
But no, I think I would say the same thing as I'm saying right now. Hoplegs was also a breeze. Working with Kevin has been a tremendous experience in the best way possible. So
that is awesome. I love that answer. No, but yeah, in consideration to challenge, we were gonna have the yin yang of this. So I would like to hear a little bit more about an achievement that you felt during this project. What was your achievement in PaperKlay?
So when you say achievement, what was the greatest sort of award that I got out of this?
Yeah, what did you feel yourself? Did you learn something new, or did you feel very happy with a specific song, for example?
It was, I think the greatest achievement for me was that finally got to say, well, at first it was that I got to make music for a video game. It was when I was going to school, early on in 2016 and 17, I kept dreaming about being able to join any project, let alone a project like PaperKlay. So that in itself was an achievement, being able to work on something with somebody that is, I would consider has become a really good friend of mine. So that's an achievement in itself. I think it's the greatest achievement anyone could ask for, is working with someone that you get along with, that has the same sort of taste as you. But as far as the production side of things, I think the greatest achievement, and it happened multiple times, was when I was having writer's block and I just couldn't figure out what I was making.
Yeah.
I would be stuck for like, half hour, 45 trying to figure out what it was. And then when I landed it and it just started pointing me in the direction, it was like an aha moment. And those achievements made me feel so good, because a part of what holds people back from doing what they love is the idea of failing. And I think that I failed numerous times trying to get the right melody. Like I was saying, what was the term you said? Kill
your darlings.
Yeah. So when I learning how to kill my darlings like early on, and then having that aha moment, everything just fell into place. And there's no greater feeling than that. Seriously, getting over that writer's block. So I think those are the two main achievements.
Yeah. And also one thing that I feel like a really interesting achievement from my part is actually looking at a soundtrack that you've made and also being able to see names like other composers as well. Even though you didn't co-compose any, like the main theme of the song that Grant Kirkhope and Stephen Malin did.
Oh, definitely an achievement.
Just having their names on the game as well must create some sort of feeling as well.
And hey, not just Grant Kirkhope, but also, the voice actors from other games like Sly and Cooper. That really, and again, I think that kind of solidifies, being able to work on a project with someone like Kevin and on a project that features all these very seasoned artists and stuff. I think that's just, it's a win. It's a real win. And I'm really excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited to see what's happening next on what you're up to. So with that said, is there anything surrounding the PaperKlay soundtrack that you feel like I missed during our talks and interview right now?
No, I think you covered basically all of it. Look for the different motifs, and once you pick up on it, hopefully it'll become, second nature in your brain. Have fun like learning the motif. I think that, essentially like we covered most of it. There's like other songs that borrow from like Mario games, like Mario 3D World and stuff like that. But basically everything that you heard today is basically what you're going to hear on the soundtrack. So
did you this is just on top of my head that just popped in. Did you have any sort of hidden gem within the sounds of this game?
Hidden gem, you said, for sounds, as in sound effects or instruments?
Either sound effect or for some sort of melody or something like that. You paying like an homage or something.
Gosh, there's the kazoo was definitely one of them. That, I swear to God, that kazoo. I actually was considering buying a kazoo after using it. They're so fun.
Love it.
Outside of the kazoo, I would say that, gosh, there were certain samples that really, like, I really loved the drum bone, like the Blue Man Group drum bone that was from Purring Depths. That one was so fun. It has such a unique timbre that I'm really happy with. And then also one that you haven't heard, which has like more of the Mario 3D World, which has like this sort of it's like a bass with like a phaser or a flanger. Most people know what I'm talking about, but it gives a sort of Mario underwater vibe. That one was really fun to come across too. There's a lot. It's hard to think. There's so many tracks. There's over 35 songs on the album, and it's hard to remember everything. But yeah.
And people will be able to enjoy this not through the podcast, but also on other platforms like Spotify, for example, right?
Yes, it'll be up on Spotify, most likely YouTube, a lot of different areas. I think Pandora, whatever DistroKid is doing, it will be up there. So yeah,
that's great.
And as well as Steam, I believe.
Sweet, so people can buy it there and support the cause. Great. So this is kind of the end of us talking about PaperKlay then. And with that said, we're closing that bag and we're focusing a little bit more on you, Nate, again. So moving onwards now, future-wise, like what is the next step for you? Or is there any project or anything that you can talk about?
Yeah, so I'm actually directing my own video game, and it's called Self-Discovery, and it's about the power of music, and it deals with like mental health and lots of different genres of music and stuff like that. So I'm working on that currently, kind of, potentially creating a Kickstarter for this. It's a passion project, but I have this really big idea that I've been writing the story for about 4 or 5 years, kind of
Yeah.
You know, away from, so that's currently what I'm doing. I'm also just open for commissions, working on you know, lighter things like stream intros or just songs in general, not specifically for games. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I also am a dog walker, so I'm doing a little bit of everything. So
A jack of all trades.
yeah, so but I think my biggest priority is working on Self-Discovery, the game I'm directing. I don't know if I'm going to be doing any development work or learning code. I probably should, and by the time you listen to this, I might even be in a in a class right now. But I'm definitely going to be doing the directing and writing the script and the characters and sort of their dynamics and their own personal lore, and then of course doing the sound of the music and stuff like that. So yeah,
that sounds absolutely amazing. Considering for the project as well, will you maybe take in like guest composers or something like that?
I actually have been working with some bigger names. Nothing I can say at this moment, but definitely working close with a few bigger names currently. And hopefully getting a pitch together to submit that to even bigger names. So yeah.
Sweet. That sounds amazing. So for people that really liked who you are and so on, is there any way for them to contact you? For example, do you have any homepage, socials where they can reach out?
Yeah, so I don't have a website yet, but you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, you know, NateTheSoundNinja or SoundNinja Nate on Twitter. Also Bluesky. Same thing, NateTheSoundNinja, TikTok, all of those things. But you can also find my, you can find my video game Self-Discovery. You can find that Instagram at Self-Discovery Video Game, all with underscores. And it's really bare bones there right now, but you know, eventually I'm going to be getting, you know, our first cutscene out there and a bunch of that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. And people don't need to write everything down really fast and so on. All the links will be in the episode description. So do not fret, just check the descriptions and you'll find everything there so you can start following Nate and support his work.
Sounds great.
So yeah, with that said, that is the end of the episode. Thank you so much, Nate, for joining my side to talk about your work that you did for PaperKlay.
I just wanted to also say that I really appreciate, you know, people taking the time to interview up-and-coming composers and giving them their spotlight, you know, so thank you very much.
That is what all about, because is it something that composers do not get is recognition, unless they're like, this is really Nobuo Uematsu high level.
Well, yeah, no, it's always nice, and you know, I'm humble enough to know that, you know, I'm just one small piece of a bigger picture, and but it's always really nice to be able to talk about music and nerd out about all the different aspects of it. So yeah.
I've been sitting here, I'm gonna have some sort of like soreness in my face because I've been sitting here smiling almost the entire time.
Nice.
It is so much fun to talk to you and listen to your stories and just pick your brain surrounding the music and your workflow, basically.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Seriously.
Yeah, it's been a blast. It's been a blast. So yeah, is there anything else you would like to just say before I ramble on the end of this episode?
Go pick up PaperKlay. It's available on Steam. It's been confirmed that it's coming out on the Nintendo Switch. I don't have a specific date. And that's all I can say for now. But stay tuned for, you know, just, you know, more. That's all I can say.
Everybody should just follow PaperKlay to get more information from Kevin sooner or later.
And if you know somebody who would love PaperKlay, send this to them. Kev worked on such an amazing game. He put so much heart and soul. And I'm really proud of him. So
100%. There's nothing else I can say more than I agree 100% with you. So yeah, with that said, it is time to close down the episode. So if you like really like this episode with the interview with Nathan here, and you want to find other episodes of Gameable Audio, you find those on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and Pocket Cast. And don't forget to also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can also listen to all the episodes. Just getting more follower counts actually help more people to find this podcast as well. So it's a great way to share without sharing it. Awesome. Feel free to also comment and follow on our social media. So you can find on Facebook and on Instagram. You search for Gameable Audio and you'll find us there. And for people that want to support my work with the podcast, all the work I put into this, and everything. Feel free to support me on Patreon by becoming a Patreon backer. And if I would get anything from a composer or a developer or a publisher or anything, I will give it away to the Patreon backers. Basically, it is a fair raffle thing going on with everybody. And new backers that we gotten since the last time we were doing this is Kim Hedman. Thank you so much for going in and supporting my work over on Patreon. And the current other backers that we do have today is Daniel Lundemark, Mike Björkholm, Lars Schenström, Titti Schenström, Kevin Wikström, Sandris Wikström, Mats L. Kebabo, Tapper Holmqvist, and Alexander Halldén. Thank you so much. And all the links, as I said, where you can either buy and support the composer that we've been talking to today, they will be found in the episode description. And for the next episode, I actually am visited by Erik Lydin and Carl Flodin. It is already a pre-recorded episode. It's done and done. But we are talking about the game Haste, Broken Worlds that they have been working on the music for. Is this a game you know of, Nate?
Oh, Haste? Yeah, I have not played it yet, but I've definitely seen gameplay. It looks amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing, I can tell already. And it was so much fun talking to both Eric and Carl who worked on the music. So I hope everybody is excited for that episode as much as I was recording it. And the episode theme was, as always, composed by the amazing Thor Myrdal. And with that said, I want to thank everybody for listening in. My name is Christofer Schenström, and this was episode 59, together with Nathan Ross on PaperKlay. So I want to thank everybody for joining in, and see you guys next time.
Bye.